Hello everyone. This position in front of you is a little puzzle of retrograde analysis that I had shared this morning on Chessbase India. The task here is to find out what was the last move played. Now, of course, you can see that the black king on h4 is checkmated by this bishop on e1. So there is no doubt that the last move was played by white. But what was this move? Of course, you cannot take back this move, this pawn from f3 to f2. The last move cannot be f2 to f3 check because that leads to an entirely illegal cluster of white units with the bishop on e1, king on g1, and these pawns on d2, f2, and h2. That is absolutely illegal. So there is no doubt that the last move was nothing but the move of the king from f2 to g1. So a move ago, this king on g1 was on f2 and it moved from f2 to g1, and in that process opened up the bishop on e1, and this black king on h4 got checkmated. This is the only way to explain this check on e1 h4 line. So yeah, obviously the last move was king f2 to g1, but our question is a little more specific than that. We also want to know whether or not this move happened with a capture, whether or not the white king in the process of moving from f2 to g1 captured anything on g1, and if it did, what was this piece? So that is our object of investigation in this puzzle. But before I go ahead and break it down, let me just clarify one point. In retrograde analysis, our only concern is always strictly limited to the legality of a position. So about this particular position, the only thing that we know is that it is an outcome of a legal sequence of moves played from the initial game array. And whether or not these moves were sensible, whether or not a move in the sequence was a good move or a bad move or a blunder, is entirely beside the point. We are only concerned with the legality. And we know that this position is legal, and we are trying to investigate what was the only legal last move in this particular position, and we will see that there is only one possible answer. So with that note, let us start our investigation. So now we investigate the very first case of our puzzle. What if the last move played by white was a simple king f2 to g1 without any capture? So the king, a move ago, the king was on f2 and the square g1 was vacant. And here the king moved from f2 to g1 and checkmated the black king. But is this situation possible? Well, once we have retracted our king to f2 and this g1 square is vacant, we ask ourselves, what can be black's last move in this position? Clearly, in this particular position, it is black who played last. What can be that last move? Can you retract this pawn back to h6? Well, this is certainly not possible because with the pawns on g7 and h7 still intact, you cannot have a black pawn on h6. Similarly, the last move cannot be h6 takes g5. That would also be illegal. So was the last move played by black a king move? Did the black king move last? Even that is not possible, because if you put the black king on g4, for instance, this is an illegal position because there is no way for this pawn on f3 to check this king on g4. Similarly, you cannot put the king on h3 or g3. So even this king doesn't have any last moves. So that is the contradiction in this particular case. If we assume that the white king did not capture anything on g1 and this g1 square was vacant a move ago, then black doesn't have any last moves and we arrive at an illegal position. So there has to be a piece on g1 to give black a last move. And this is the reason why we can conclude that king f2 to g1 happened with the capture. Now let us analyze what was the piece captured on g1. Now, can the piece captured on g1 be a bishop? Well, I don't even have to analyze this. There is no way you can have a bishop on g1 with a white pawn still on h2. This check with bishop on g1 and king on f2 is absolutely illegal. So this case is eliminated trivially. Now let's analyze if we can have a knight on g1. This is also a very trivial case. With the knight on g1, we still don't have any last moves for black. We've already seen that the black king and the black pawns don't have any last moves. And if we put a knight on g1, we don't have any last moves by this knight as well. There is no way we can pull back this knight to h3. So if we assume that the last move was knight h3 to g1, then our king on f2 would be under an illegal check. And of course, if the white king is under check, black cannot play. Black cannot play his knight from h3 to g1. That is completely illegal. So that is the reason we can't even have a knight on g1. Now we go to the most non-trivial case of this entire puzzle. What if we have a rook on g1? Would that position be legal? This is by far the most interesting case in this entire solution. Now, when you see a rook on g1 and you see that these pawns on e2, g2, and h2, and this bishop on f1 are all intact, they have never left their home squares, you know that this rook cannot be an original rook from a8 or h8. This has to be a promoted rook because there is no way an original rook would ever be able to penetrate this first rank and get to g1. So there is no doubt that this rook on g1 is basically a promoted unit. That is the only way we can explain the presence of a rook on g1. And now the question is, can a black pawn actually promote to g1? So if it has to promote to g1, then it must have come from via this route. It must have captured something on f2 and then something on g1 and promoted to a black rook. But is this really possible? Now to analyze that, we first need to look at these two pawns. Where have these two pawns come from? Well, it's very clear. This pawn has come from f7. It has captured twice, once on g6 and then on h5, and it has landed on h5. So this pawn on h5 is actually from f7. Similarly, this pawn on g5 has come from e7. It has also captured twice. Now, if these two pawns are from e7 and f7, then we can conclude that this pawn that promoted to g1 must have captured at least thrice. On the e file once, then on the f2 square, and then on g1. It must have captured at least thrice. Now, for what it's worth, even a pawn on a7 can capture many pieces and promote to g1. But in this particular scenario, the minimum number of captures required for a pawn to promote to g1 is 3. Capture on the e file, on f2, and on g1. But can we have a minimum of 3 captures here? Well, so assuming that there have been 3 captures on this particular line, we have a total of 7 captures. 3 captures here and 4 captures by these two pawns. So a total of 7 captures. But can black capture 7 times? Well, this is certainly not possible. We just have to look at the number of white pieces present on the chessboard. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So there are 10 white pieces present on the chessboard. The number of white pieces missing is 6. So there is no way the black pawns can actually capture 7 times. And this is the reason why a pawn cannot promote to g1. And hence, we cannot have a rook on g1. So we can't have a rook on g1. We can't have a knight on g1 or a bishop on g1. And we have also seen that the last move of white cannot be without capture. White can't simply play king f2 to g1. It has to be with a capture. This means we are left with only one possibility. There has to be a queen on g1. This is the only possibility, the only legal possibility. So the last move played by white was nothing but king f2 takes a queen on g1. And of course, in this particular position, black has a last move, and that last move has to be with the queen on g1, because we have already seen that black pawns and the black king can't have any last moves. And of course, the queen on g1 does have a last move. It could have moved from h1 to g1, and it could have also captured a unit on g1. We don't know. So this is a perfectly legal situation. So that is the solution, the whole explanation. I hope you were able to follow it. And if you think that I left something out and there is some flaw in my analysis, please point those things out in the comments below. I'll see you soon in the next video. Till then, uh, take care and happy solving.